In the winter of 1870, there was a whaling ship called Freedom's Fortune. It had just reached the waters off the coast of Maryland, ready to dock, after a few months of whaling up in the waters off Maine. The ship was filled with cargo, the men tired from being at sea for months. The water was choppy and the air was chilled. A storm was approaching. A green mist approached the ship as it headed to port. A crack of lightning flashed across the sky. Just then the bosun's mate, Edgar Evers, shouted, "Ship off the starboard bow!" Out of the mist, a ship appeared seemingly out of nowhere. The sails were in tatters, and there appeared to be cannon-sized holes along the side of the ship. The men on the deck of the Fortune were stunned. They rushed to the railings to get a better look. The name on the side of the ship read USS Independent. The only problem was that the USS Independent was sunk 6 years ago by a Confederate ironclad during the Civil War. The men were spooked. They were staring right at a ghost ship. The ghost ship had a whole crew working its deck, like it was an ordinary night. Their uniforms were tattered and bodies withered to the bone with decaying flesh. The men gasped in horror on the deck of the whaling ship. One man even screamed in terror. When that happened, all the crew on the ghost ship turned their heads and stared directly at the whaling ship. Their mouths slowly opened and they began to shriek and moan. Just then another flash of lightning filled the sky, and the ghost ship disappeared into the green mist. When the whaling ship docked, the crew told their tale to whoever would listen. No one believed them at first. For almost a year, no one had seen the ghost ship until the same wintry night, a year to the day. A merchant ship spotted it off the coast near Baltimore. It only appears on that same wintry night every year on the anniversary of its sinking. This story has been passed down through the generations of my family. My great-great-grandfather was a young lieutenant on the whaling ship for the first sighting on that wintry, eerie night. This is the story of the waiting woman. Elizabeth was wed to William Clearly in the mid-1800s. William was extremely wealthy, and Elizabeth had expected to enjoy a life of bliss and luxury. But sadly, after the wedding, William showed his true colors. He was cruel and demeaning towards Elizabeth. He treated her as his property and made it clear that she existed only to produce a son, to inherit his immense fortune. It took several agonizing years before Elizabeth was able to conceive, during which time she endured unthinkable physical and emotional abuse at the hand of her husband, who blamed her for failing to produce a son. She foolishly hoped that this child would finally change the course of her life, but the story only grew more tragic. After a long and difficult labor, Elizabeth delivered a beautiful, healthy baby girl. Before she even had the chance to see her daughter's face, the midwife carried the screaming girl out of the room and straight to William's study. Elizabeth laid in her bed alone, losing blood, and listened as her husband hollered in rage. A moment later, the front door slammed and she listened as the sound of her wailing child seemed to fade slowly. Extremely weak, Elizabeth stumbled to the window and watched in horror as her deranged husband threw her newborn baby into the river behind their home. Though near death herself, Elizabeth rushed outside and waded through the waist-deep water, frantically searching for her baby. Distraught and extremely weak from the grueling labor and blood loss, she struggled to remain standing in the strong current. Her own blood clouded the water around her, making it impossible to see clearly to the bottom. She searched desperately until she could no longer will her body to stand. After several minutes, Elizabeth collapsed into the cold water, never resurfacing. Within a year, William had remarried, and his new wife was lucky enough to quickly produce the son that he had demanded. All seemed well in the world until several years later. William watched from the same bedroom window that Elizabeth had years ago, as his young son played in the yard near the river. He looked away for a moment to attend to some work, but when he looked back, his blood ran cold. There in the middle of the river stood Elizabeth's horrific, ghostly form, holding his son. Without giving William any time to respond, Elizabeth descended into the river with the young boy, as his father looked on in horror. All search efforts to find the boy were fruitless. His body was never recovered. Elizabeth is said to still be seen on occasion, wading through the river, searching for her daughter, as she is always watching the banks. If she sees any children playing nearby, she will take them down into the river with her, believing them to be the child she never even got to see. None of the children she has taken have ever been found. There was a young banker named Jonathan Rowland, and he was off to the yearly summer ball. When he arrived, he said hello to his friends and went to the refreshment table. There he met a young girl named Julie. Their hands grazed as each grabbed for the same cup. He apologized, and they sat down and had some punch and got to know each other. The two were having the most tremendous time. They told each other about themselves, their hobbies, their hopes and dreams. By the end of the dance, there wasn't a single thing they did not know about each other. As a matter of fact, they had such a great time getting to know one another, they never even had a chance to dance. The music ended, and the announcement from the stage declared the dance over. "My goodness, the time flew by," Jonathan said. Julie agreed. Jonathan asked Julie if she would save a dance for him at the next ball, and she of course agreed. Thunder could be heard in the distance, and heavy rain hitting the roof of the town hall. Jonathan had brought an umbrella with him and asked to escort Julie home. She said yes, and they started to walk. She thanked him and said she didn't live far, just over the bridge, in a nice little cottage on the beach. It was raining, but not as heavy as before. They continued to walk and enjoy each other's company. And when they reached the bridge, Julie decided to stop at the railing and look down at the waves crashing upon the rocks below. The wind was beginning to blow quite strongly. Jonathan was starting to feel his umbrella being tugged from his hand. "Julie, it's starting to get pretty bad out here. Maybe we should start heading home now." Julie turned around with a smile on her face, but before she could say anything, the wood railing she was leaning against cracked, and a strong gust of wind knocked her over the side. "Julie, no!" Jonathan cried out in horror as he heard her screams echo as she fell to the water below. Jonathan dove in to try and save her, just missing the rocks. He searched and searched to no avail, barely making it out of the water with his own life. The storm was so violent, Julie's body was never recovered. Jonathan wasn't the same after that. He kept to himself and didn't socialize with anyone. Until a year later, a friend of his was able to get him out of the house and come with him to the summer ball. Jonathan did not want to go at first, but with constant prodding, he gave in and decided to go. Plus, he thought it might do him some good to be at the place where he was last happiest. When Jonathan arrived, he sat down at a table with his friend, but was quickly alone when his friend got up to ask a lady to dance. Jonathan sat alone for a few minutes, and then got up and headed to the refreshment table. He reached for a cup and grazed the hand of a young lady. He raised his head to look at her. "Oh, I'm sorry, madam. I did not mean to." When he saw her face, his jaw dropped. It was Julie. "How? Julie, you're dead," he said, trembling. "I saw your body hit the water. You drowned." "Yes, but I promised you I'd save you a dance."